seconds. Okay. So, hello, welcome everyone at this webinar. We'll wait a couple of seconds for everyone to join. I think we're already seeing people joining, so that's great. We'll wait for a little bit more so that everyone can join the webinar from the first slide on. All right, yes. So let's get started with our webinar today about the dairy in a VUCA world, a European market briefing, which means it's not only relevant for European players, but also companies outside of Europe, of course. And today, we'll talk you through this briefing via the webinar. So before you ask, we'll send a recording on the presentation straight to your inbox. So no need to make print screens. You'll get the full thing in your mailbox afterwards. So today, myself will be presenting, and my colleague Randy Steenbergen, who is our senior solution consultant. Maybe Randy, you can introduce yourself a little bit.
Yes, hello. My name is Randy Steenbergen, Senior Solution Consultant at A Insights, working at the company for almost a year now and mainly focusing on our clients in the dairy sector. So together with Bart, I will be hosting this webinar for you today. Thanks, Bart.
Yes, great. So before we start, a little bit more about what we do. So we are A Insights and Valona, actually. We are two intelligence companies that joined forces recently in 2025. And our merger is about building intelligence as an infrastructure. So organization can monitor change early, stay ahead of disruption, and turn uncertainty into opportunity. And we do this by combining two capabilities, structured quantitative intelligence, so financials, performance signals that show you what happened, and real-time market context and foresight, so the why behind shifts and early signals of what's coming next. And this is like a representation slide of all the things that are the outcomes of what we do, but on that a little bit more later onwards. Because is your intelligence infrastructure ready to meet the moment? Because we all know that we're in a VUCA world, which means a lot of volatility in all the industries, actually, a lot of uncertainty and complexity with that, obviously. We ourselves not only say that, but also research shows this, right? Because volatility is no longer temporary, it's actually structural. So this is also research from the World Economic Forum and McKinsey that shows that actually 82% of companies operate in an uncertain or unpredictable environment. And of that, only 1 in 4 feels truly resilient, and only 16% are confident in their foresight capabilities, which is actually the lowest of all the corporate capabilities that they've measured. So what's happening here actually, right? So most organizations have actually improved their ability to react. So crisis teams are sharper, disruptions playbooks are in place, but reacting is not the same as preparing. So many companies still rely on linear forecasts, single-based scenarios, and short-term planning cycles. And that limits their ability to anticipate real shifts in the market on competitors, regulation, geopolitics. What does this mean for companies in dairy, right? It means that actually it's imperative to ensure that you have ongoing visibility on key developments that have an impact on your business. And today's focus is on 4 key developments that affect the European dairy companies and industry. And the question here is, will this be a challenge or an opportunity for your company? And all these 4 points we'll talk through, or at least Randy will, because he's the expert in the space. And we'll also share with you a little report about the Middle East crisis, how that affects and impacts the dairy industry. So without further ado, let's see if we can unpack these trends in European dairy.
Yes, thanks, Bart. Let me try to see if I can take over the screen. Should be on now, so let's kick it off. Yeah, thanks, Bart. So just let's kick off with by looking at the first challenge that we identify, and that is the milk supply across regions and the challenges that brings for Europe. But before we actually dive into the milk supply, I think it's good to start with a macro perspective, because we know that global population is anticipated to grow by approximately 400 million people towards 2030, with a large part of that happening, of course, in Asia and Africa. Simultaneously, we know that GDP is expected to grow as well. And with that, historically seen, there has been a correlation with protein intake, of course. And with a large part of that protein intake will have to come from dairy. And basically the delta that you can see in protein intake, that can be up to 60% if someone moves from the lowest income bracket to the highest income bracket. So that means that there is an opportunity for the dairy sector to be a part of this, of course. But let's look at the projections of milk supply across the geographical areas to see how they can play a role in this. So if we start with Europe, which we can see in the middle of the screen here, then the first thing that comes to mind basically is that the milk supply is expected to peak in the coming decade, after which we will see a slight decline, which you can see here in 2040, mainly due to environmental regulations and the imposed decrease of the dairy cow herd that comes with that. However, I think there's always a positive note to make here, and that is, as compared to last year, if we compare these two projections, then we see that the outlooks have actually slightly improved, and that has been due to revised productivity projections per cow, basically. And to give a bit more detail on that, we'll move to after this to the next slide, where we will have a deeper look at the main driver of these milk projections within the EU. Another key actor that we can see on this slide is, of course, North America, with the US in particular. And the expectations are that the US will actually solidify its position on the global market, with multiple noteworthy reports and projections actually expecting a steady increase in the milk pool in the United States. However, if we do that same comparison where we see last year's projections in the lighter shade and this year's projections in the darker shade, then something that comes up is that basically there has been a significant downward adjustment in the milk production projections, especially from 2035 or 2030 onwards. And we've also seen these signals in late news articles as of early 2026, where multiple industry stakeholders are basically flagging concerns regarding the dairy herd stability, which is caused by a system that is currently more accommodating the beef sector rather than the dairy sector. And if you combine that basically with a lot of the announced dairy processing capacity expansions for the next few years, then experts are really concerned about an imbalance in milk supply, which is probably hard to solve within this year and next year, potentially even leading to, of course, higher farm gate prices in the coming period. With that said, let's move to the other side of the globe. So let's have a quick look at Asia. And I think what stands out, of course, here is that the lion's share of all milk production growth will materialize in Asia, with approximately 80% of the global projected growth being realized on that continent until 2040. And if you look at that, at the breakdown of where that will happen, then countries like India and Pakistan are, of course, at the forefront, but also China is there in the mix as an important actor. However, of course, this will have slightly less effect on the global trade because it's mainly production for local consumption. So it will basically fulfill the local needs that they will have. So as promised, here we have a breakdown of what the most important drivers will be behind the milk production developments in the EU in the coming decade, basically. And this data is also available in our market monitor, and our market monitor can basically help you identify what the latest expectations are in terms of milk production, based on the drivers that you see here as well, so yield per cow, but also the herd size. And we as A Insights can then help you translate those data points into actionable questions that you might have in, for example, optimizing your production footprint or your milk sourcing strategy. So let's quickly look at the two charts that you see on screen. And if we look at the picture on the left, then you can actually see a confirmation of that stabilization of the total production in the EU in the coming decade. And that's basically a combination of two things, where we see that the yield increase will basically counterbalance that decrease in dairy herd that is imposed by the sustainability regulations. As compared to last year, this is an improvement in the outlook. And the main reasons for this anticipated yield increases are advances in feeding technologies, but also improvements in cow genetics. However, if we look at what this increase will be towards 2035 compared to last decade, then we see that it's much less, and that is so 1.2% as opposed to 2%. And that's much lower than these previous realized gains, as marginal gains now come at a relatively higher cost compared to what has been realized in the past. So if we quickly look at the figure on the right, then we see the distribution of this milk production across regions within the EU, with the EU 14 in the lighter shade being basically the including the more traditional dairy countries such as the Netherlands, Germany, Ireland, and France. And in the darker shade, you see the EU 13, or the countries that later joined the EU, which more or less include the emerging dairy countries like Poland and Czechia, for example. And then we see basically how this developed over time, so in the past, but also towards 2035. And what you can see here is that that growth will more or less in absolute terms come equally from those two regions. But of course, the EU 13 comes from a much lower base. And although it is a bit a minor change, I think these are the early signals that the Western European countries are no longer the growth engine, of course, for the European milk pool. But that will shift probably, or these are early signs that there is a shift happening within the EU. With that being said, let's also look at how these dynamics impact the shift in product mix and focus that we see at dairy companies, but also in what consumers tend to prefer. So basically what we are seeing is that one of the main trends within European dairy is, of course, that fresh dairy production and consumption has been dropping and will be dropping also towards 2035. Especially as well, this in complement with the milk supply stagnating. It is key also for European dairy processors to become increasingly more focused on these value-added products that you can also see on the slide. But before I comment, let's quickly go over the graph. So on the chart on the left, you can basically see on the x-axis the production growth between 2025 and 2035 for each product category, and on the y-axis you can see the net export growth in that same period of time, basically. And then you see that there's a clear change happening in product mix if we're looking at these broader categories that are shown here, such as cheese, fresh dairy, etc. So these are on a high level. To zoom in a bit on the top right, we basically see that the production volumes of cheese, whey, skim milk powder, but also butter are increasing significantly the coming decade. As well as for the first three categories, we see that there is an increasing amount of volume that will become available to be traded on the global markets. But simultaneously, there are also two main categories that see a significant drop, of which I think fresh dairy products is the one that's becomes most apparent in this graph as well. And this also means that speaking in relative terms, even more milk equivalents within the EU will go into these high value products that you see here on the top right. Of course. However, what we've also done here on the slide on the right is we've translated or we've broken down this broad category of fresh dairy products into its subcategories. And I think even in this basically challenged category, there are still some opportunities. Looking at fresh milk, that's the obvious biggest challenge category, of course, with a 9% consumption decrease expected towards 2035. However, I think if you look at cream, yogurt, and even other fresh dairy products, we do see positive consumption growth for the next decade. But I think what's key to highlight here is that even within these winning categories, for example, yogurt, it is key to select the winning proposition, because growth will mainly come even within these categories through some subcategories, such as, for example, high protein yogurt, gut health products, or clean label items. And that's also something I want to highlight here, basically, because if we translate that to a more granular level, where we try to identify multiple drivers that are causing also these additional challenges for dairy processors, I've tried to break that down into the three that you see on the screen here on the left. So basically what I was already trying to explain on the last slide, we have these shifting consumer preferences. We have the threat of plant-based or hybrid alternatives. As opposed to traditional dairy, it's also an opportunity, of course. And then there is this milk stream diversification going on. So zooming in on the first item, basically, shifting consumer preferences. So besides, of course, the traditional dairy products, we see a lot of functional dairy becoming more popular, such as high protein, gut health focused products, but also meal substitution beverages, for example, or items are becoming increasingly popular, as well as ready-to-drink beverages and value-added products such as iced coffees, for example. And besides the type of products that people are consuming, we also see a shift in the consumption occasions and quantities. And all of that is, of course, resulting in a demand for more package-sized variety. And to add to that, I think another key shift that you see in that product mix is the basically the rise of plant-based and also more recently, of course, the hybrid alternatives. And the big question there is, of course, not if it will come, but when it will come and how. And especially since plant-based product innovation is developing rapidly, we see that gap between traditional dairy or animal-based dairy and plant-based/hybrid, the gap between price, texture, and taste is slowly closing. So they're also becoming more ubiquitous in all product categories, and not just fresh dairy, but also cheese, for example. And they're not only competing in the branded segment anymore, but also in, more and more in private label segments. If we add to that the diversification in milk streams, where we see an increasing focus on animal and environmental awareness, that are basically driving the developments of milk production circumstances. And with that, also dairy processors, of course, trying to differentiate with those milk streams by sourcing milk with, for example, distinctive origin or green production. And add to that retailers are also choosing for certain sustainability labels for their private label products. This is not only an opportunity, but this also, of course, leads together with the other items on the slide, that there is more competition in the grocery stores, in the retailers for the shelf space that is available for the dairy products. And not only that, so not only the sales are becoming more complex or more pressurized, but it will also make the production process in the dairy plants more complex as to how to manage all these milk streams, how to incorporate plant-based in your facilities, and which SKUs to actually pick and produce, for example. So looking at how some of the world's largest dairy firms are basically navigating this shift in product mix and trying to identify new focus areas that are, of course, profitable, then we have put here a number of actually sort of short use case or business cases from Arla, from Danone, and from Fonterra. So let's go over them very briefly. I think Arla is a good example, as they have been recently strategically repositioning their food ingredients business through M&A with, for example, the acquisition of Volag Whey, but also the potential merger with DMK offers opportunities, but also the reprioritization of some of their existing sites. And even last week in the news, I saw that they acquired a new plant in the UK. If we look at what they're doing in terms of their retail brands, I think it's good to mention that a lot of their new product launches and growth are very strong in high protein. And for example, those added value products such as gut health, which they focus on. And if we translate that into concrete figures, then we see that they're realizing high double-digit year-on-year volume growth in that category for multiple years straight within high protein. Secondly, if we look at Danone, there we see that over the last couple of years, Danone mentions that they have partly exited that challenging market of fresh milk, which was a business that they reportedly accounted for 1 billion euros in annual net sales. But simultaneously, the company basically doubled down on the protein trend by setting up their high protein platform, which can be recognized through the GetPro, HiPro, or Oikos brand, or some other local equivalents to that. And with that platform, they have basically quadrupled net sales from approximately 400 million euros in 2021 to over 1.5 billion approximately in 2024. Final one to mention here is Fonterra. Fonterra, of course, decided to, which is not in Europe, of course, but also a very good example. But of course, they decided to divest their global consumer and associated business to French dairy company Lactalis last year to focus on their higher margin food service and ingredients channels instead. And that decision basically came after the division posted a significant loss after tax in the 2023 financial year and previous struggles they had. And now it will basically enable and allow the company to invest in what they believe will be their areas of future growth instead. So that's to wrap up the second section. So let's thirdly zoom in on what is actually happening and what does this all mean on the global dairy trading market. So I think if we quickly revert back to what we've seen before, then that is for Europe, it means that the continent has to refocus its production and exports towards more value-added products. And if we break that down, or if we analyze that through basically in terms of the traditional dairy exporters on the supply side, and the importers on the demand side, we basically see the following things. So on the supply side, I think the most important developments are, of course, so one, that Europe will have to focus more on those value-added products, especially to capture growth, not necessarily maybe in terms of volume, but especially in terms of value. And that is, of course, one of the consequences of the stagnating milk supply. But opposed to that, we see that a relatively mild environment policy is setting up the US to solidify its position as a key actor on the international markets, with that milk supply projected to grow. And also with opportunities for the US to expand in cheese and whey powder, but also in skim and whole milk powders. However, as mentioned earlier, it's good to keep a close eye on those short-term supply constraints, of course. If we move further down south, then Argentina is expected to capture a leading role as a regional supplier for Latin America, while on the other side of the globe, New Zealand is, of course, geographically and capability-wise, very well positioned to accommodate the growing demand that we'll discuss in a bit for dairy in Southeast Asia. However, good to mention here is that, like Europe, New Zealand is also a bit constrained in terms of production growth there. So let's look at the demand side or the importing side. The traditionally key importer of dairy and dairy powders is, of course, China, but they are ramping up their domestic production capacity. And in addition to that, the population is aging, and those dynamics will have an impact on the amounts of milk powder that they will import in the coming years. However, there is partial relief coming from historically high demand in the Middle East, North Africa, but also from within the Asian region, namely in Southeast Asia. I think also good to mention here is that, however, North African countries are increasingly price sensitive, but also a country like Algeria has last year announced the world's largest integrated milk powder production plant that is to commence in late 2027, which means that there will be challenges for European milk and milk powder producers that might have to divert their products into other regions or other products on a relatively short notice. And to basically finalize the comments on global trade, of course, as we all know, geopolitical turmoil and also rising protectionism are fueling this uncertainty and putting additional pressure on global trade and threatening international supply chains. So make sure to check out our recent analysis of the impact of the conflict in the Middle East on the dairy sector and the European dairy sector that we'll share later on in the webinar. Then we come to the final topic of today, which is sustainability. And what we see there is that basically companies are observing friction to basically navigate the complexity and cost that sustainability regulations and efforts bring, and the income and how to monetize basically those efforts. So let's start with the former, so the complexity and cost. And what we see is that European dairy processors in particular are dealing with more and increasingly complex legislation regarding sustainability, which makes it that companies have to act now in terms of investments and additional costs to guarantee a future-proof business. And that actually, if we look at the income side of things, so the revenue side of things, it's actually quite the opposite. where clients of dairy processors basically do not always acknowledge the added value of more sustainable partners or suppliers. And additional to that struggle, or as a consequence of that struggle, they cannot basically pass on these additional costs to their own clients, because also the end consumer is not necessarily willing to pay for a sustainable premium in that sense. So monetization of these higher costs and the recovery of these investments are expected to take at least several years, with some estimates even ranging from periods of 5 to 10 years, basically. And to remove that friction, it's basically crucial that 3 aspects align across value chains, the dairy value chain, being more transparency, so widespread availability of data on sustainability, but also comparability, of which systems such as CSRD, of course, can help, where customers are, which enables customers basically to pick suppliers based on certain sustainability criteria, but also the consumer has to be willing to pay that premium for sustainable products that these suppliers will actually, in the end, then manufacture. So with that, I would like to wrap up the content part, and I would like to give the floor back to Bart.
Yes, thank you for doing that. So I'll take over again. So for all of you who watch it here and now live, please click the button below to get that PDF analysis on the Middle East prices and the impact on dairy. Or if that doesn't work, or you don't want to click, then you can always email me and you get your copy straight away. My email address is bart.scholts@stripeinsights.eu. So I'll give you a moment to click if you want before moving forward. I think from the story that Randy told us, there are a lot of elements and things to watch and keep an eye on in the near future. And that also presents us with the question that is your intelligence built to meet the moment? So all this turmoil in the world, but also changing market dynamics, trade lanes, and competition. Do you basically have a dedicated intelligence team to support your decision making? Do they also report directly to leadership, which we often see that is not the case? And actually, can people working on intelligence and on insights on market and competition spend 80% of their time on strategy? So thinking about, hey, what does this mean for our company, and how should we basically act when a change happens, and not on admin. So collecting all that information, making sure those early signals are visible, because actually the timing is everything. And this is a slide that I talk through a lot with the people that I speak with in the industry. Basically, what I hear a lot is that companies have very good internal data. They know exactly how the business is doing, but actually they lack like an outside-in perspective, which is not really helping when change happens, like the crisis now, or another crisis, or basically changes in the market. You see that change happened, and they go straight into a rushed context sprint. And in doing so, they try and collect all the information that they have, and then see what options they have, and then basically the window of opportunity is really small, and it becomes like actually a decision window. So what we advocate for is also, when you look back at the slide about the World Economic Forum and McKinsey study, is that winning companies embed actually a continuous market intelligence capability into their decision making. So they don't wait for change or disruption to happen. They actually spot early signs or early signals, and try and build context around those very quickly already, and make scenario plannings already, so that when change happens, they already are able with options to then make their decisions on, or if the change is really something you couldn't foresee, they have the capability to act really fast. And I think that's also when it becomes a window of opportunity compared to your competition. So because your decision-making window is larger, you have more options to look into. And basically, that's also what we try and do at A Insights, is that we enable a structured, ongoing market intelligence that strengthens foresight and supports faster and better decision-making. Because resilience today isn't about surviving the shocks that happen, but it's actually about seeing them coming and acting before your competition or your competition does, basically. How we do this is illustrated in this slide. I think it's a nice representation of how we support. So on the left-hand side, you see how we turn fragmented market signals into proactive, decision-ready intelligence. So on the left-hand side, you see the breadth of inputs. So we combine a global source base with competitor financials and trade data that Randy was talking about. But also we use third-party integration and field intelligence, meaning insights come directly from the market and from your teams. So this raw information, then obviously there are lots of sources, is then structured and analyzed through our platform, enriched with also AI-powered research capabilities that actually are acting on top of our curated data, thus also giving you very good insights on this. So the technology is purpose-built around decision workflows and not just generic dashboards or newsletters. So on the right-hand side, you also see a couple of the outputs that you could expect. So we've got on the right top corner trend radars to detect emerging shifts early, quarterly leadership briefings to synthesize developments into strategic implications, and also collaboration features that ensure intelligence is not just collected, but also actually used. And in short, this is how we move from monitoring to meaning and from information to strategic advantage to our customers. And that's what I wanted to end it with today. If you're interested in learning more about how this could work for your organization, then again, please feel free to reach out. You can also start asking your questions in the Q&A box. But I see also that we're getting into a little bit of a time constraint. So please share your questions. And if we're not able to answer them now, we will reach out to you directly and we can set up a call or we answer the questions via email. So yeah, thanks again for joining. I wish you all a very nice rest of the day. And we'll hope to inform you in the near future with even more insights about the dairy industry. Thank you a lot.
Thanks, Bart.
Thanks, Randy.